welcome to the Passenger Seat Podcast, a podcast designed to fill your passenger seat with chat about classic cars, all recorded from my 1968 Morris Minor Peggy. I'm Becca, and today we're going to do something a little bit Valentine's Day themed to keep it in keeping with the week this week. So this podcast is going up on the Thursday, and the Friday of this week is Valentine's Day. So if you're listening as it goes out, this is your reminder if you haven't already, and I'm sure you all have, but if you've got a loved one in your life and you need to go and grab a card or some flowers or whatever it is that they would appreciate most, go grab that whilst listening to this. So I had a little think about how I could make a Valentine's Day themed podcast, and I thought about all those romantic movies and things like that have cars in them. And so what I thought I would do is find 10 cars that have featured in movies that have either a romantic theme or are considered big romance movies or kind of fit the theme, and rank the cars, kind of give them a bit of a out of 10 score as to whether I would ever have one on my fleet. I'll probably talk about what I think about the cars and a little bit maybe about the movie. Great inspiration if you're looking for a movie to watch tomorrow night with a little bit of a car theme as well. We're going to go through these in order of the age of the cars that are featured in the movies rather than the age of the movies. So it's worth noting that in some cases the cars that are featured in these movies were probably not considered classic either at the time that the movie came out or at the time that the movie's set, but I think they're pretty cool cars nowadays anyway. So we're going to start off with The Great Gatsby, and we're going to start off with the more recent version, but I suppose we can dwell a little bit on the 1978 version. The most recent version features a 1935 Duesenberg Model J in an iconic yellow colour that is often associated with The Great Gatsby. And the interesting thing about this is, whilst obviously the car is absolutely stunning, the book is based in the 1920s, the film is based in the 1920s, and yet to get a car that felt like it reflected the opulence of the movie and stuff like that, they ended up going with this Duesenberg. And it's an absolutely gorgeous car. You guys know I love my 1930s cars, and they're quite tricky to come by, but I think it's probably going to rate pretty highly. I would probably give it a decent 8 out of 10 to start with. Really lovely, probably going to be quite difficult to look after though, and also probably quite difficult to get parts for and keep on the road. But it would be an absolutely iconic car to at least have a day out in, I think. A lovely summer's day in a bright yellow car like that could be real fun and a nice little trip. Now, the earlier movie also had a yellow car, but in that one it was a yellow Rolls Royce. And again, they had the same situation, that the car is a later car than the movie it is featuring in terms of time period, so it's almost the opposite of a classic. It's a very futuristic car for the movie, but a beautiful car nonetheless. I think out of the two I'd probably go for the more unusual Duesenberg. I really hope I'm saying that correctly, but it's also a little bit rounder in places and a bit more similar to the 30s cars that I really like the look of. Moving on now to the 1940s. We have got a 1940s Buick Phaeton, and this featured in the film Casablanca. It's quite a key thing within the storyline and features quite prominently. There's a few cars, but the Buick Phaeton is perhaps the most memorable. I love the styling of the 1940s American cars. It's very Airstream styling and really cool looking, and I think I'd almost pick that over the Duesenberg from the Great Gatsby. So I think that would probably rate maybe an 8.5 out of 10. It's a very, very strong contender, and again, they're quite close. I do love my 30s styling, but the American cars from that period in the 1940s and stuff remind me of one of my favourite TV shows, Agent Carter, which Peggy is named after. Now, sticking with this American theme, we have the Holden Commodore from The Notebook. Now, The Notebook is a brilliant movie, a very popular romantic movie, and it obviously covers quite a long period. The car from that early part of the movie that's driven by one of the main characters again fits that American styling, and perhaps a little bit more practical with the fact that it is a saloon rather than a convertible. So another very strong contender, so perhaps eking out a 9 out of 10 in my ratings. Again, with these American cars, it might be a little bit harder to get parts for them in the UK and even find them for sale in the UK, but I think it could be a very cool addition, and again would work really well for my love of Agent Carter. Moving up to 1948, we have arguably one of the most famous cars on this list, and that is a Ford Deluxe convertible from the movie Grease. And obviously it has two looks within the movie, the kind of white paint job that it has during the racing. A little bit later on it gets that kind of iconic red look, and it's such a cool car. I think seeing this movie so much growing up definitely got me interested in that kind of scene and that kind of racing within the American classic car scene, and I do kind of look very enviously on it, and I'm wondering if I've started my ratings too high, but I think this one will probably be my 10 out of 10 because I have such a soft spot for the movie, such a soft spot for the car, and wouldn't it be so cool to own the car that was from Greece? And let me know in the comments or over on Instagram whether you believe the very popular fan theory that actually Sandy drowned at the beginning of the movie and everything else is just a dream, because I certainly didn't see it that way when I was growing up, but having kind of watched it again more recently and heard about this idea, it's definitely an interesting one, and adds to the understanding of that kind of fantasy of driving off in an even more done up version of Grease Lightning. We've got another one of those kind of quintessential 70s and 80s movies with Dirty Dancing next, and the 1957 Chevy Bel Air that is driven by Johnny in the movie. It's a really cool car. It does suffer a bit at the hands of Johnny. I believe there's a bit where he kicks out one of the windows or something. I can't really remember, but when I was looking all of this up and kind of confirming what cars they were, there was definitely a mention of that, which is obviously not great for it, but there's some great cars. There's a Corvette like the one that Barbie has in the Barbie movie, and just a a greater range of cars in that movie, but Johnny's one is perhaps the most recognisable, or the one that the family drive to the camp in, perhaps. But definitely a strong contender for the best one in the movie. And we've had a definitely strong American contingent so far, and I'm feeling like the other ones are all a little bit stronger, so we might put that back down at an 8 out of 10 for owning it. Although my mum would think that I'm really cool because it's one of her favourite movies, or perhaps her favourite movie. So really interesting to look into the cars that were featured in that, to kind of make it the period that it was set in whilst being filmed in the 80s. Eking into the 1960s now, we've got an MGA 1800 roadster from the film The Age of Adeline, and this movie had quite a lot of cars in it, and also quite a lot of car crashes, without going into too much detail and ruining it, because you might not have heard of it. I certainly hadn't until I was looking into this, but I've been doing some reading about it, and it's now on my to-watch list because it sounds really interesting. But this MGA is featured quite prominently in a scene where Adeline is getting her driving license checked, and so you get to see quite a lot of the car, quite a lot of the driving of the car. And I relied a lot on a website called IMCDB, which is like IMDb but for cars, on this particular podcast, and it's really great. It's basically fan run in the fact that people put up screenshots of the cars that they've spotted in movies, and then others help identify them so that you can work out what cars were used in what scenes and stuff like that. And there was a few people on that website that were saying that they'd seen the pictures of the MGA, that's what started them watching it, and they stayed for the Saab that comes a little bit later on as well. So a great collection of cars in this movie. Some of them, I do warn you, it comes with a bit of a warning. Some of those cars do suffer, but there is a great range of them in that, and they're used as a really key, I guess, storytelling piece to kind of place the character throughout time, because there is over a century of time really covered within that movie. So well worth looking into. Before I forget, we must give the MGA a rating, and whilst I think they're cool, I kind of prefer some of the other cars on the list, so I think it's probably gonna sit at maybe the 8 or 7.5, just to give some variety out of 10. I know they're popular, and it's great to see a British classic featured in an American movie, but I think a 7.5 is good for that. Now this next one is going to arguably fight hard for the top spot of the most well-known car on this list, with the Grease car. And if you've been thinking hard about what might come up, you probably thought of this. It is of course Herbie from The Love Bug. Herbie in this one is a 1963 Volkswagen Beetle, and obviously absolutely iconic, the start of a franchise that I think many of us car lovers enjoyed watching as we grew up, and a very strong contender. I'm not someone, I think, who would like to own a Beetle myself, but I do adore the Beetles that are owned by people that I know. So you guys know Vic, who is owned by my friend Tash, and my uncle and aunt also own 2 yellow Beetles. And so if I'm rating this purely on cars that I would like to own, it's probably not going to rate very highly, maybe a 6 or a 7, but in terms of coolness, in terms of it being such an iconic car, it's probably going to have to be a 10 out of 10. So a really tricky one there, because when you've got a Morris Minor, I don't feel like there's much need in owning a Volkswagen Beetle, but to own perhaps the exact Herbie, now that would be very cool. And if it was able to talk to you too, then that would be fun. It would make diagnosing issues with cars a lot easier, and I reckon me and Peggy could have some fantastic conversations. We'd make a great podcast together if she was talking back as well. So a great opportunity there, perhaps. Now, coming out for Valentine's this year is the latest one in this series of rom-coms, and of course we're talking about Bridget Jones's Diary. And in the very first film, Hugh Grant's character has a very attractive Mercedes-Benz S8 convertible, and there's not much debate that he definitely had the better choices in cars from that first movie of her two potential love interests. So it is a very strong contender. I do love these 1960s Mercedes-Benzes. They do look absolutely fantastic. They've got just such a cool styling about them, and they're just so very cool and really suit the character, obviously, within Bridget Jones's Diary. So I think this might be another strong one, perhaps another 8 out of 10. A very cool car, would be a nice compliment to Peggy, given that it's a convertible. So if it was kind of joining my fleet as is, it would be a nice addition, I think. And Mercedes-Benz is typically quite well supported, I think, in terms of parts and stuff like that, though I think a little bit more expensive to get hold of than a Morris Minor. So it would probably have to be a high days and holidays sort of car. But what a fantastic holiday you'd have, kind of driving around in such a stunning convertible in summer. We are rattling through these, and there's not many left, and we've kind of skipped the 70s. I couldn't find many cars from the 70s being featured as key cars within romantic movies, but we skipped to what I think IMDb had rated as one of the very best romantic movies, and that is Pretty Woman. And within this, Richard Gere's character drives a 1989 Lotus Esprit, very cool, and if it was Jamie doing this list, this would probably be his 10 out of 10 choice. But for me, I don't really think it's something that I'd want to have. So maybe it's, I mean, I wouldn't say no if I was being given one, but I don't think it's something that I'd ever actively seek out or get excited about kind of seeing for sale. So maybe a 5 out of 10. Obviously so cool, and no shade to the Lotuses, but if you've been watching the channel for a while, you know that it's not really my typical sort of car. Therefore, low score, but fantastic movie, fantastic car, really suits the movie. And yeah, if I was Jamie doing this list, it would definitely be a 10 out of 10. And I definitely enjoyed seeing it in the movie itself. Now, finally on this list, we have got my favourite rom-com, and that is About Time. It's another kind of time travel-y one, but not quite as broad as Age of Adeline, and features Bill Nighy, who's one of my all-time favourite actors, and a car that unfortunately has a bit of an incident in the movie is a little purple Fiat Panda that has very carefully been painted by the character of Kitty, and matches her personality perfectly, and it is one of those early 1990s Fiat Panda styles rather than the later style, and yeah, really suits her as a character. But it's not really a car that I would choose to own. I know these cars have a massive following and they're hugely well supported, but I don't think it's something that massively appeals to me. So as cute as it is, and what a lovely purple it is in the movie, I think it's going to probably be a 4 out of 10. It's probably the car I'd like least on this list, so that kind of fits. But I highly recommend the movie. The car doesn't feature a lot in it, and it does have a bit of an incident at one point, but it's a great movie nonetheless, and I had to feature it on this list because I do vividly remember the purple Fiat Panda that I think on IMCDB they noted was originally red and had been kind of hand painted that purple colour, which is certainly something the character would have done in the movie. I don't know if it was done for the movie or if it was already like that and they'd managed to find the perfect car for her. But a fantastic movie and well worth watching. I'd love to hear your thoughts if you think that there's a fantastic car in a romantic movie that I've missed. It's obviously well worth mentioning that probably the best movie that you can watch with cars in that has an element of romance is, I would say, Cars from Disney Pixar. I love that franchise, and it's so good, and huge variety of cars in it, and just doesn't take itself kind of too seriously, which is fantastic. But yeah, let me know what your favourite romantic car movie is. I hope that if you've got any plans for tomorrow, they all go swimmingly. But in the meantime, thank you ever so much for listening. Drive safely and happy motoring.